hope, Fiona, that I've just covered it by saying that. We have apologies.
Just quickly, Councillor Robertson, sorry, it is recorded on Teams, just so everybody knows. Yeah.
I don't think there's anything else that I need to say for the public, just to cover that, because the wording about filming at meetings is redundant now. So do we have any apologies for absence, Fiona?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Sarah James and Councillor Poku, who I think was here but has had to go to another meeting.
Yes. We have any urgent business?
No urgent business.
And anybody got any declarations of interest? No? Excellent. Minutes. Can we indicate, I can't read this, can we indicate the minutes of the last meeting are a correct record? That was of the 5th of October, not of 2021. Everybody happy with those minutes?
I agree,
agreed?
yes.
So minutes are agreed. Right. So we move to item 6, which is the performance management, and that's on page 5 of the pack. So it's over to, is Richard here?
Hi, yes, I am.
Twice in one day, Richard.
Yes. Afraid it is a similar story.
Feast or famine. So over to you. Would you like to introduce the report?
So this is the standard CPAC report that comes through once a quarter. It's based on our general routine report, so I'm afraid some of you this story will be a bit familiar, but it is. I'm just struggling to open the documents here. It is the same. Yeah, here we go. Yeah.
May I just
so it's a regular report.
May I just stop you for a moment? Sorry, Richard. I just want to check with Bev. We weren't recording the Aspire session, Bev.
Thank you.
I don't think it was recorded. It was just us. Sorry, just to allay any worry in that department. Sorry, Richard. Carry on. Beg your pardon.
Yep. No problems at all. Okay. So yeah, if I'll just dive in and quickly skim through the highlights. I say, because most people in the room, I think, are familiar with most of the stories going through here. So overall, starting with the US as a percentage of the looked after children, this is now showing at 7% as of the end of the last quarter, end of last month, which is low. By our standards, this represents somewhere in the about 23, 24 unaccompanied asylum seeking children, as normally before the pandemic, before Brexit, we'd have been expecting that number to be near 42. So as a percentage of our looked after children numbers haven't changed, the US have. As you can see, the next chart down is coming down. So do you want me to share the screen so you can, or are we looking at the notes? Shall I share?
I've got paper copy, but I think it would be useful if you shared the screen for everybody, yes.
Yeah, just to keep up the notes, yeah, sure. Okay, so the rate of looked after children, having dropped down over the last couple of years, is now back up to where we'd expect to be, in line with our statistical neighbours, which represents a range where we're comfortable with of between 380 and 420 children, which is where we feel we should be. There's been some changes in the makeup of that. As I said, we've got fewer unaccompanied asylum seekers, which means more children somewhere else, but the overall headline number remains in the same range. We've had 5 children leaving care for adoption so far this year, which is about a normal figure, really. I say normal, I mean pre-COVID, pre everything else, yeah. So a range of between 10 to 12 a year is a normal good amount for adoptions for borough like ours. In terms of the up-to-date plans, how well we're monitoring children's, the PEPs, 88% is good. It's showing there a slight decline on the last term, but the last term was exceptionally good. So that was a record-breaking term. 88% is still a good number for PEPs. On the pathway plans, we were 66% at the end of December, but I put on there the January figure to show that was just a blip, because these things do change week by week. So we're now back up to where we want to be. And on the care plans, 89%, again, a good solid number there, showing that we're on top of this. Up-to-date visits is at 82%. This is being enhanced. It says in there, the DfE are currently asking us to report to them every 2 weeks on visits to children in care, children on the CP plan, and children in need visits, to see how many of them are seen within 4 weeks, which doesn't actually fit in with the statutory timescales, but it does show there's a lot of focus on visits across the board at the moment. There's a couple of other indicators in there as well, like social care sickness as well, social worker sickness, which we also report, which so far we've always been able to report is less than 10% due to COVID. So that's showing that's not having an impact on the situation from that side. In terms of stability, this is normally a good news story for us, and it continues to be so, with 9% of children having 3 or more placements. And obviously some placement moves are needed or in the best interest of the children. So you don't want this number to be too low. And we think about 9% is generally a safe, a good number for us. And in terms of the children who have been in long-term placements for more than 2.5 years, this has gone up now to 72%, which is very much in line with the statistical neighbours for other boroughs with our demographic makeup. Another good news story now, after as Councillor Brabazon, we mentioned this morning, some real problems with dental checks during lockdowns, when at 1 month we were down at 44% of children with up-to-date dental checks. We're now at 79%, which is very near 80% target where we want to be. So we're much happier with that, except hands up that 80% isn't enough. It should be higher, but 79% is a vast improvement. So a lot of good work's going on there, because there's an awful lot of people involved in getting that number up. So it's really good news. Children in care with an active EHCP plan, we're at 23% at the moment. This is something we're building into the reporting. So as we get more joined up reporting, we'll be increasing the demographics and a bit more information about those children at the moment, and whether they're getting their annual reviews, etc. But at the moment, so we're just saying that, so it's just that 23% at the moment. And again, with the Youth Offending Service, we promised this would be included in future reports as well from the last time. So put that in there. And now we're looking at 31% of the children or the young people open to Youth Offending Service are in care. But this isn't because of an increase. Actually, there are fewer children. It's gone down from 23 to 19, but it's just because the youth offending cohort has fallen for all the problems they've had, not that they're making. So the percentage has gone up. So something to be aware of there. And that's they're showing the breakdown over time. So it does always fluctuate, but 31% is quite high. Of the care leavers in EAT, 67% of the 19 to 21-year-olds in education or employment, which is shown very well compared to our statistical neighbours. So we're quite happy with that. Well done to Emma's service. And of those activity types, you can see here all types of EAT have increased. It's not just no, it's the training, the higher education, and the other education have all gone up, and it's the NEETs that have gone down, with the illness, the unspecified, and the pregnancies is down below our statistical neighbours as well. And suitable accommodation is equally good news, with 90% of both the 17 to 18-year-olds and the 19 to 20-year-olds being in suitable accommodation. And that's certainly the 17 to 18-year-olds is a very volatile number because it's such a small cohort, but it's actually, to keep up there 90% is very good. So that was a quick fly through of the numbers. anyone's got any comments or questions?
Anybody like to go to the question? Ellen, you've got your hand up, your real hand, and then Sakina.
Thanks, Zena. Richard, I can't believe you've stolen my thunder by putting the 80% figure for January in. See, and I knew that was aimed at me, and fair play, because it stops me moaning about it. So yeah, thanks for that, and it's reassuring to have it so on the graph. So thank you. I wanted to just say, in general, that it's really, really good to see those figures about the care leavers. Like it just gives the impression of such a stable service that's really being proactive to support our young people. So really well done everyone for that, because I know that's difficult, and that the older our young people get, then perhaps the less inclined they are to engage with us, and so those figures are fantastic. So really well done. My question, and it might be that this is for a future meeting given what you said about the EHCPs, I'm assuming the 23% is the number of, or proportion of our children in care that have got active EHCPs, and I just wondered if you had any indication of how many of our children in care of the cohort is waiting for an EHCP assessment.
Right. I don't know that exact number, and I know the assessments are taking, or they're supposed to take 20 weeks. That's taking a bit longer than that at the moment. So no, I don't know the numbers for that. I'm sorry, from the top of my head.
No, that's fine. If we could have it maybe for next time.
That is the sort of thing. Yeah, certainly for new ones, but that's the sort of thing we hope to be improving in future times. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sakina?
Just a quick question on suitable accommodation. I just wanted to understand a bit more about what that was.
Yeah. Okay. There's no fixed definition of what is suitable accommodation. There's certain things that definitely aren't. Living in a hostel, living in a foyer definitely aren't. Being in prison definitely isn't. Staying with your foster carers, it definitely is. So there is a bit of professional judgment involved in that.
Okay, thanks.
Did you want to follow up on that question?
No, I just wondered whether it would be worth having some sort of criteria for what suitable accommodation is. It can be pretty high level, and I understand there's a lot of professional judgment that's going to be exercised, but just to have some sort of reference point.
Yeah, we've got the definitions for the statutory returns we have to do, which is yes, no, suitable or not. I can give that to you. I'll post that through the thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Tammy, do you have anything you want to ask? No?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, I had a follow-up with Sakina, I was thinking along the same lines, but my question was, you talked about the second highest destinations, paragraph 2.5, were 18 young people who moved into independent living, and I was curious to get a bit more information about independent living and what that comprised. I'm thinking particularly, there was a discussion with the expert advisor, so it's sort of in my mind. So if someone could talk about what type of independent living they've got, that would be really helpful.
Do you want to speak to that, Emma?
I can, Richard. I believe that will be the young people that are moving to their permanent accommodation, Councillor Brabazon. So they'll be moving into their permanent Haringey, Homes for Haringey accommodations, or housing association accommodations. So there was a slow during the pandemic, but we have 61 beds that are allocated for our care leavers in the year. We've had all sorts of challenges around settling young people, but that statistic is now picking up. Yeah. So we're working really, really hard because we've got the last sort of 3 months to achieve our 61 beds up until the end of March, and then we get a new cohort. In terms of our 2-bed cohort, we get 6 allocated to us, and we've achieved that this financial year. So that's very positive.
Sorry, what do you mean a 2-bed cohort as opposed to the...
So we get 6 2-beds allocated to us because we have a number of parents that are open to us who are care leavers. So quite a number of years ago, we went back to Homes for Haringey and requested a 2-bed quota alongside our 1-bed quota, because what we didn't want to have is overcrowding for our care leavers, if at all possible, to avoid that. And that's been, we have achieved that every single year, 100%, because of the demand and the need within our cohort.
So when the young people go into independent living, into the 1-bed flats,
Yes,
they're furnished. We provide the furniture and bedding, and we start them off like a trousseau.
We do start them off. We have their leaving care grant. It's called a Setting Up Home grant, and they get up to £2,000 to furnish their flats. What young people are really struggling with at the moment is actually the enough funds to manage the flooring. Flooring has really gone up. I don't know whether anyone's tried to put carpet in their home recently, or yeah, it's incredibly expensive. And what we're finding is that the flooring is taking up the majority of their grant. And so on top of that, we've been applying to different charities as well to see how we can bolster that. Because £2,000 actually is very difficult to furnish a flat with, believe it or not, if you're starting completely from new.
No, absolutely do believe it. So,
yeah.
And that would include getting a cooker and a fridge and all the a bed and all the rest of it.
Yes, absolutely. Includes all their white goods. They can access their leaving care grant slightly earlier than when they move into their permanent, because some of them want to buy their own bedding, their own bits and pieces much sooner than they move to their permanent, to help them settle wherever they currently are, so they can take those things with them. Of course, if it's larger items, that does become challenging, because then we need to get a man with a van and removals, and it becomes very costly, because that can eat into their grant as well. But some of them do want their beds, some of them do want tellies. It really varies from person to person, and what we will do is an assessment, and based on need, give them early access if it's deemed appropriate.
And overall,
yes,
how do you find they cope with moving into independent living? And what I know that we have a support program for people leaving care. Perhaps you'd like just to give us a bit of a heads up on what's going on.
Sure. So we ensure that all our young people, before they move to their permanent accommodation, go through the Money House. And the Money House is it's actually one of our flats. We've taken one of our flats from the quota to set up a programme, and it's facilitated for a week-long programme for each young person, and they tend to go in cohorts. And during that intensive week, they will learn things such as budgeting. They will learn how to check a meter, change a light bulb, all the different sorts of life skills you can imagine. And you'd be very welcome to come and visit our flat. We're very proud of it in the borough.
You teach me how to do things. That's all right.
Pre-pandemic, we were also running a really successful program with Homes for Haringey on DIY, because some of the feedback from the young people is they were really struggling to, know what paint goes where, and just manage some of those DIY issues when they first move in. So we did have that pre-pandemic, but unfortunately that has lost its way. We hope to get that back on track in the months to come. We also have a strong partnership with Metro Bank as well on the High Street, and they will offer a bank account for many of our young people, but also some money management support. We also have a life skills accredited scheme that is a really simplified approach to building on one's life skills, and any foster carer, any key worker, any PA, any social worker can actually follow that programme. There's about 25 different sections to it, and for every section completed, a young person will get an accredited certificate. That's really helpful for their CVs as well. We were also running pre-pandemic mental health first aid, and we were doing that in conjunction with Mind, and that was really to help young people to identify for themselves their own well-being and to know how to navigate and how to seek support. We're very conscious that feelings of isolation become more apparent once you're in your own accommodation. And actually, the thought of wanting a tenancy is this great aspiration, and it sounds really fun and exciting, but actually in reality, it's an enormous responsibility, and young people really can struggle. So, you know, it's a process, and some are in such a rush on their 18th birthday to be nominated and start going down that route for their permanent, but we really do have to gauge it on an individual basis and make sure that our life skills programme is tied into what's in the pathway plan, where they're at in stage of their life, you know, how they're managing day to day, whether they're in education and training, whether they're working, because actually if they're working, rent can become very difficult, believe it or not, to not end up in rent arrears, particularly if you're on a zero-based contract. That is not helpful for our care leavers. So there's so much to think about and so much to plan with our young people, and it has to be a staged and a staged programme really for each individual.
Anybody want to ask anything to follow up from that? Because that's very, very interesting area that we might want to pursue separately. You've offered to visit a flat. I would be really interested to do that. And I don't know if members of the committee would like to. We could have a little trip.
Yes. Yes, the Money House would love to run a programme for you, Councillor.
That's all right. There's lots of DIY I need to learn, so I'm very pleased. Shall we perhaps arrange that outside this meeting, if committee members, because I think it gives much more of an insight, and I'm very struck by the need to strengthen our role. You know, I'm very mindful of that, so I think that would be really good. Is there any more questions on this report, which is, as everybody says, positive? Sakina and Tammy, you've lived up to my expectations and got a question. Sakina.
Just quickly, I just wanted to know whether, you know, obviously there's a cost of living crisis at the moment, and it'd be interesting to hear perhaps next time how that's impacting our care leavers.
That's a very good question. Can you give us a headline on that, Emma?
Yeah, it has significantly impacted. During the pandemic, we've had quite a number, unfortunately, lose their jobs. We've had young people that probably should have got furlough, but perhaps didn't understand the route to that. I would say that it's had tremendous impact. Yeah, we are definitely purchasing more food during the first stages of the pandemic. A number of staff actually ran food banks out of the boots of our cars so that we could make sure that we got food out to our young people. We've got over 50 parents that we're supporting in our leaving care cohort, so it's not just single adults, it's actually families. I would be able to bring more information to the next EPAC if that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That was really useful to hear. Thank you.
Tammy?
Yeah, I think just to kind of follow on from Sakina, really, I think it would be really good to have a report. I know it's really difficult to kind of project too much into the future, but I guess based on, you know, even when you're talking about, you know, the cost of basic things like carpet, you know, we know that, you know, COVID and Brexit have kind of had a real impact on the delivery of things, and not just the delivery, but the wait time for furniture. You know, IKEA, for example, is kind of putting really basic costs of, you know, really basic furniture, kind of increasing its cost really significantly. So it is going to have a really long-term impact. I think what I would also find really useful is actually, so I know we don't hear from our older kind of care leavers very often. I think we had one chap that came a while back. He was great. I think it would be really great actually to kind of hear their first-hand experience as well about, you know, what it's like moving into their first place, what support they're getting from us, what more we could do, you know, what it's like out there in the employment market, you know, what the challenges are. You know, I think it would just be really kind of good to understand and hear their perspective of, you know, kind of what the world looks like for somebody kind of who is sort of 18, 19, leaving care, and yeah, what more we can do really.
I don't know if we could set something like that up, but you know, it doesn't have to be a formal meeting. You know, that we have a, as I said, I think maybe as we move to more in person, I don't know. Perhaps you could think about that, Emma, and
absolutely, that would be no problem. I know in the, maybe not the last CPAC, but the one before, we had our university, young people at university come and speak. So we could do something similar along those veins. Might be helpful to bring to life some of the challenges that is happening. One thing just to also mention is just energy prices, and the impact, you know, that's having also on our young people, to bear in mind.
I mean, this whole thing about the way costs are rising, and that they're going to be on limited incomes and so on. It does raise questions about what our role is, and you know, acting as the backstop, and they're not legally in our care anymore. But obviously, we have we still have all the links, and we follow them up and so on. I was wondering whether it would be worth having a link to Haringey Just Giving. To see whether there would be some sort of match because they have a committee. I don't quite know how it works, but I think they have a whole committee around what they allocate money for. Okay. And whether, you know, if £2,000 is all we can provide. I don't know if that's a limit or our own limit or a government limit or whatever it is, but whether there's a way perhaps to call for a match or something like that. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be.
I don't know what colleagues think. Something like that. I know you go to the charities like Tottenham Charity and so on, but they're quite limited in. You know, I think it's about £300 is the maximum.
I'm on the board. I was going to say I'm on the board of the Tottenham District Charity. It's 500. It's kind of capped at 500, isn't it?
Oh, 5. Okay.
Yeah. I agree with you, Zina. I think it would be really good to kind of cost out, you know, what we know is kind of, you know, in terms of energy prices. You're already talking about really basic things like carpets and other things, and you know, we know that the cost of food is going up massively. Those things aren't going to come back down. I think it'd be really good to get a report on that, and to kind of formally think about how much more we need to kind of raise that 2,000 from to kind of cover this. I think it's just, we just cannot expect people to cover the cost of some of these things themselves. You know, it's something completely out of their control. You know, they're starting out, and it's almost like they're being set up to fail, isn't it? Because of things that aren't within their kind of control.
I'm sure we wouldn't set them up to fail, and I'm going to ask Anne to come in.
Yeah, no, sorry.
I know what you mean.
I'm setting them up to fail. You know, just.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. Anne, you wanted to come in, I'm sure, to reassure us.
I do, Councillor Brabazon. The £2,000. Obviously, everyone would want more. I just want everyone to be. I just want Councillor Brabazon to be mindful that we're not able to set budgets in this meeting, and that before we consider that would need to. Yeah. So you know, I just want to, you know, just to remind us of that there are budget pressures, and of course we'd like to review it, but we would have to do so through a paper. And as Councillor Palmer sets out, looking at what the costs are, it is one way. And also to say that our care leavers did get, and Bev might remember, Emma, you might remember, through the hardship funds we made exceptions for our care leavers, and we were able to send their way. It was one-off money. I think it's been repeated twice. So, but actually looking at what they do, I think we should perhaps bring back, or rather through Councillor Brabazon's one-to-one, bring back a paper, because it's because of the cost associated with it. We wouldn't be able to make that decision through here, but certainly through, say, a growth bid or so we could. Councillor Brabazon, I'm mindful we've got about 4 other reports tonight, and we've got about an hour left of the meeting.
Ellen, did you want to come in quickly? We'll just do 2 more minutes on this, because it has stimulated quite a lot of discussion, which, you know, I feel more positive that we are discussing than not discussing, if you see what I mean, Anne.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Ellen.
absolutely.
I was going to suggest, Sina, I wonder whether it's worth you speaking with Ruth, because we've got quite a lot of businesses in the borough, one way and the other. And I'm sort of mindful that there was that Tiles R Us, or I can't remember the exact name, that sponsored the education, the Outstanding for All awards and things like that.
Good idea.
And I just wonder whether there's a conversation with Ruth and the business networks to see if we could get some sponsorship. You know, or if some of our local companies might give a better deal on carpet for care leavers who are moving into their home, because it's not, you know, we're not talking about hundreds of young people every year. We're talking about a very specific number of young people who are moving into those properties. And also, I think we should put some pressure on Homes for Haringey for it, because in my day we did the whole sort of corporate parenting thing, and a lot of the things that we've talked about with the with the DIY courses and things like that, you know, were started a little while ago. And I just wonder whether there are just other bits of the council that we could, or the council's organisational structures, that we might just try and see what they might be able to do, because I think we can be looking beyond the CYPS budget and into the Homes for Haringey budget, and also into the wider community, to see if, you know, what's the harm in asking?
Absolutely.
All that happens is people say no.
You're absolutely no harm in asking, and you're absolutely right. And that's why I was thinking along the same lines, but more along the just giving, but actually the same type of idea. So not really to look for any money out of our budget at all, and just to reassure you. So I think we'll come back to this. I want to have one tiny question on this, and then I promise we'll move on, which is when they get their flats, if they're in a Homes for Haringey block or a housing association, if things are not going well, like for example, there are problems in the common parts, or, you know as a councillor the difficulty I have in dealing with a housing association. I don't want to go into a long reply. I would really like to talk perhaps separately how we deal with that, because sometimes it can be difficult, and if you're on your own and a young person, must be very, very difficult if you know what is a flat, but in an environment where it doesn't quite work out. You get my point.
I get yes.
So maybe we can return to that.
Yeah. Can I say, Councillor Brabazon, at this point that Bev, you mentioned Mark Riddell, and we mentioned him, I think, at one of these at an earlier meeting of this, and he gave us some really handy tips on how we might strengthen the corporate parenting advisory group. And one of them was and Bev plans to bring a paper back about that, so that we've got subgroups. And one of those we think will be on housing. So this will be another way to keep our focus on that area. So there'll be almost like Every Child Matter themes group. And so in that way, we can get business partners to come and speak with us and offer, that. So if we can wait for Bev's report, but also separately come back on the care leaver work, because
excellent,
lovely. Thank you, Councillor Brabazon.
Yes, in other words, members of the committee, you're going to be getting more to do. Shall we move on to the next report, which is on page 11, and this is on the thematic inspection on the experiences of Black and mixed heritage boys in the youth justice system. And I think, Emma, this is you again.
It is me. Just to let you know that the report is in the pack and there's links to the full report. But I felt it would be more helpful to share a PowerPoint with you. I'm having a slight problem with my PowerPoint, forgive me. It may come with, let me see what happens when I share it. Just give me one moment.
Emma, do you want us to back up to send it to me and I can try and present it?
I can't seem to get it just to show the slide. Hang on.
I've got the a version of it open here, if that helps, Emma. It might have slightly changed, but I've got a version that I can open.
If you wouldn't mind, Jackie, yeah, I know you would actually, of course you have it. Thank you.
So just ignore the fact that it says scrutiny on the front.
Yeah. We just move to 2, number 2, slide 2, that would be great.
Okay.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So I just wanted to bring to committee's attention that Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation chose the experiences of Black and mixed heritage boys in the youth justice system as their subject of their thematic inspection in April to June 2021. For Haringey, this happened in May, and Haringey Youth Justice Service, along with 8 other youth offending services from across the country, including 2 in London, were selected to take part in the inspection. Of the 173 cases inspected, 15 were from Haringey, and user voice was used to obtain the views of 38 boys who had been supervised by the different youth justice services. The findings of the report was published in October 21 and overall found significant deficits in the experiences of young Black and mixed heritage boys. And the themes of the findings that came out were the multiple adverse childhood experiences and high levels of trauma that the children have faced, special educational needs, very high level and mental health difficulties, exclusion rates from school, again, poor attainment and evidence of SEN not being fully addressed. Exploitation was seen in almost a third of the young people having been victims of child criminal exploitation. Evidence that children had experienced racial discrimination. A third of the boys had been subject to child in need or child protection plans, and over a quarter of the cases, the child had a disability. The boys had often grown up in the poorest areas of their towns and cities and often been exposed to the violence and family breakdown associated with poverty. If we can move to the next slide. Okay. In terms of Haringey, we actually received some very positive feedback, and it was notable in terms of our progress that we've made in this area. Leadership was clearly supporting the culture change of the Youth Justice Service around disproportionality. It was very evident that we've been taking a child-first approach, considering ethnicity and diversity of our boys. Our safety planning model is incorporated across the community and in our partnership work. They noticed notably our partnership with the library around our reparation and some of our accreditation work. There's good quality of interventions that were identity based. They recognised that staff were very motivated and had clear understandings of the issues, and representation of panel members was reflective of the community that we serve. Next slide, please. There was a particular case study highlighted for Haringey. What they saw was some really good examples of our partnership work and our creative projects being delivered to our boys. There was access to projects such as Red Snapper. This is an intervention that's aimed at tackling stigma around mental health in the Black and minority ethnic community. We'd also developed a music offer to support children to express themselves constructively. We have a working partnership with Sony Music to provide opportunities for children to take part in internships. And they could also be provided with a mentor to support them with their goals if they wanted to go into the music industry. Our Ether programme has been very successfully. We commissioned this with Wipers. It's an 8-session programme aimed at our Black, Asian and minority ethnic boys. The sessions include discussions around stereotypes, breaking barriers, perceptions of masculinity. We've been ensuring that further programmes have been commissioned, and during lockdown we've also had a number of various creative clubs running. One is our virtual cooking club. It's aimed at improving life skills of our children, and children are encouraged to cook food that represents their own individual culture and heritage. The YOS has also published and produced a disproportionality podcast. It focuses on the lived experiences of our ethnic minority children who've grown up in Haringey and gone through the youth justice system. It's co-produced with Bird podcast, and our YOS manager at that time and the local councillor were also interviewed to give a wider perspective on disproportionality. If anyone's interested, we can share the podcast, and I believe there's a link in your pack. There was 18 recommendations overall. For local authorities, the recommendations focused on us making sure that we're providing suitable and timely accommodation placements and support packages for our boys who are facing remand or being released from custody. Making sure where children and families are moved to new locations because of their safety, that the accommodations and placements that are provided are suitable and sustainable. To ensure that our Black and mixed heritage boys are receiving their legal entitlements to education, including alternative provision where this is deemed necessary, and that placements are suitable to meet their needs. In terms of our YOS partnership boards, the recommendations included having a vision and a strategy for improving the outcomes of our Black and mixed heritage boys and making sure that these are known and understood by our frontline staff and our partner agencies. To ensure all board members contribute data from their own individual services that identifies areas of disproportionality and the actions being taken to address that. And the need for data that is developed for a joint strategic needs assessment, and to have a joint set of partnership targets, for example, with schools and children's services for improving service delivery, and to make sure mechanisms are in place to track and monitor and evaluate the outcomes. In terms of our YOS managers, the recommendations go on to state that we need to make sure that we've established effective processes for gaining feedback from our boys on services that they are receiving, and that feedback's assessed and reviewed to improve the quality and stability of our service provision, to make sure that our staff understand what's expected of them in their work, and that they're inducted, trained and supported to work effectively with this group of children, to improve the quality of management oversight and to ensure that it's sufficiently focused on diversity. What that means in practice is that there's clear escalation routes to address any barriers in terms of accessing services that they might need, address gaps in specialist provision, either by delivering it in-house or by commissioning it from appropriate community organisations, so that referrals and uptake rates are evident, and to offer suitable and appropriate support and intervention to parents of our boys and regularly review the uptake and suitability of the provision. So in terms of our progress on the recommendations, we've been working very well with our partnership to make sure that they can use their own data to help inform our work and better understand how we can make individual improvements to address disproportionality. We've introduced a new QA quality assurance tool to increase our management oversight and ensure that we're addressing diversity and structural barriers. We've incorporated a workshop on fathers and understood some of the barriers around absent fathers and making sure that we capture voices better. Bespoke informal education sessions on identity, culture, lived experience and stop and search. So in our October half term, we delivered workshops around rights, responsibilities and the impact of stop and search on young people who had received an out of court disposal. Very well attended and very well received. Stop and search is now being recorded as a significant event to inform planning and interventions. We recognise there's further work to do around mental health and speech and language provision. That's something that the board is working with us on. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, has anybody got any questions on this? A very interesting presentation, I might say. Ellen, sorry.
Yeah, I raised my physical hand and I thought I was then I was looking for the virtual hand, but you saw me. Thanks, Emma, and everybody. I think it's really heartening in the report to read about the progress that's been made and the good practice that was recognised by the inspectorate. I think it's really, really good news for the young people that we try and support through such traumatic, actually, events in their lives. So that's great. Given that we are the corporate parenting committee, I just wondered if there were any specific themes that came about or came to light through the process of inspection in terms of the young people that are in our care. Because earlier on we heard, I think Richard said there were 19 young people in our care who are within the youth justice system. So are there any specific lessons for those young people or for the service in terms of supporting those young people?
Yes, we're currently reviewing that, Councillor Weston. We are very aware that our looked after children within the youth justice cohort tend to also be the young people who are more likely to have been excluded from school and that are more likely to have the higher end mental health needs and concerns, that are likely to have learning difficulties that are currently unmet and undiagnosed and unseen, actually. So we are undertaking an audit of our LAC and SEND, in particular those with EHCPs, to do a deep dive to learn more. There wasn't anything specific in the overarching HMIP inspection that came back specifically for our looked after children, but nevertheless we're very conscious that that's an area we need to do some work on, and we are. Yeah.
That's really helpful, and it would be good at some point when that work is completed to have an update on it, because I think the more evidence we've got, then the more evidence I guess you will have to use to justify adjusting services and so forth. So an update on that when you're ready would be really useful. Thanks.
Tammy, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, and a really interesting kind of read. So kind of following on from Ellen, really, I think what I would find really helpful is to kind of understand, so it's kind of the intersectionalities of all of this, isn't it? It's kind of putting together all of the overlaying, factors around the decisions that are made, by, kind of authorities about these young people. And I think it'd be really interesting to kind of understand where the looked after aspect comes in. So is that a factor? Is that a really defining factor in deciding, what happens to that young person? So, is there such unconscious bias? Is a judge or a member of the police force, if they were to just find out that young person is in foster care, would they make a different decision to a young person that isn't? And I think it'd be really good to kind of, they've kind of laid out lots of other things, lots of other circumstances, that kind of all adds up. And I think for me, it'd be really good to understand, because again, I'm always really keen, I think based on my own experiences, even now as a 45-year-old professional grown up, when I tell people I grew up in foster care, they make a judgment about me, which is ridiculous. And actually, if I experience that, I'm fairly certain that young people are still experiencing it as well. And I think it would be really interesting. And again, just more around education, isn't it? Just breaking those barriers, really kind of encouraging kind of those authority figures to understand the challenges that looked after young people face, and why that kind of stigmatism and that judgment just isn't helping, and what they need to do to kind of address it.
Councillor Palmer, if I just come back quickly on that, I mean, I think absolutely there is disproportionality in our systems, unfortunately, and unconscious bias. What we're doing is focusing on some unconscious bias training, and that's been rolled out across the partnership. We also work really closely with the courts, and we are ensuring that we put a child first lens in all our court reports, which I think is really, really important. In our out of court disposal panel, we would challenge decisions that are being made, but I think the key is getting the voices of our children heard and their experiences. So again, we're working very closely with the service to ensure that that's possible, and get that out to as wide an audience as possible. Jackie, I don't know whether you want to add to that.
No, I think everything you said is right. I mean, it is, we did consider what information we bring specifically here that focuses on our looked after children. And the reality is that it didn't come out as a strong theme other than it's a factor to be considered. But bearing in mind that I think almost a third of our cohort are looked after. And also, I think just under 50% are Black boys, that we know that there's the correlation. There will definitely be a number of those will be looked after children. So like Emma said, we are doing the deep dive on looked after young people send and open to the Youth Justice Service. And I think that would be great to bring back at a later stage, really.
Yeah.
And
Can I add, Councillor Brabazon? It was my suggestion that we bring this report here, not because of the overemphasis on looked after children, but just because there was just a little bit of Venn diagram overlap, and these are the issues that we should be mindful of. That there is disproportionality, but Councillor Palmer and Emma, do correct me if I'm wrong. If a young person is stopped on the street, at that point the police wouldn't know that they're looked after. It's, and so they all get the same, I'm going to be mindful of my words because we're being recorded, treatment. However, the point is right that, when people do speak about their experiences, people make judgments of them through their lives, actually. And so it's entirely possible that we're in a room and we don't know in that room of professionals who's looked after, because people have got used to not speaking about their experiences, and so so young people sometimes then can lack role models because they don't see in the room or hear in the Houses of Parliament or in in the health and even in social care who is care experienced. I remember in another local authority that I worked with, the chief executive of the health service, after about 3 years, pulling me aside and sort of saying, I just want you to know, Anne, I'm care experienced. And I just thought, wonderful. Can I speak with my children in care who looked after about this, because, he was an amazing person, but, yes, I'll stop there.
Can I just come back to that super quickly?
Yeah, go on.
I think there is something really important, isn't there? And I noted actually in some of the reports, like, I think you're right, Anne. So if someone stopped cold in the street, of course they wouldn't know. But actually, if somebody becomes known, and there was a young lad in there that talked about being stopped 5 times in 1 week, and they know, they get to know, it's like, oh, it's so and so. We know that he's looked after. He's trouble. It's that judgment then, isn't it? It then becomes not a kind of a stop and search for any reason other than, oh, it's so and so, he's looked after, he doesn't go to school, we'll put all of those things together. Oh, he must have done something wrong. I think it's that, isn't it? It's all of it's putting all of those things together and coming up with a completely wrong conclusion most times.
Absolutely.
And it's that it's not adding being looked after into the mix of the reason that somebody has done something wrong.
Yeah, and our work on stop and search hopefully will begin to make inroads into that work. Yeah, thank you.
I've just got a couple of points and then I'm going to move us on because Anne has reminded us that we've got fixed time. So my first one is about whether we have parallel to all of this, the Haringey Learning Partnership, which has, as far as I can see, done an amazing job with some very young people who've got some very difficult circumstances, and I just wondered whether whether any of that has related to any of the young people in our cohort. Are they with the HLP, or whether you see any any links to help them because of the improvements in the model for change? That's my first question. Does that make sense? Have I explained that clearly? My second one is really it's also about exclusions. We have had hardly any exclusions in the last year. I think Evelyn said 3 permanent exclusions.
Yeah, at one point it was 2 or 3. It may be as high as 5, but that's significantly reduced in one term when it was 13 and 19 as a total. So we are making inroads there.
And I just wanted to know whether, I mean, it's my own ignorance here, whether that includes the academies, because the report makes references about academy chains, and half of our secondaries are academies. So I just wondered whether those numbers were included or whether they're separate, and whether there's any things we need to look at there. So can you answer those?
My understanding is that an exclusion is an exclusion is an exclusion.
Okay.
So yeah. And I was in Commerce Road today, and a young person had newly arrived from an academy, and we had prevented an exclusion. So I didn't. I don't know whether the care, if that person was looked after or not. It didn't come up, but it was just sort of that they'd come from an academy.
So I do think that some of the work we're doing in the Learning Partnership is really a model for supporting some of these young people, whether they're in care or not in care, because there's this, this sort of overlap. And the final point I'd make about the report is that what it lists is as factors in that are common factors, going from adverse childhood experiences through to speech and language, through to SEN, are things which we instinctively know is the list, as it were. And so I think the policy implications for us on the work we do through all the age groups, there are implications for that. So obviously through the early years review and so on, and our need to get speech and language therapy, all the rest of it, all of that plays to what's on that list, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
If we look at it as a whole. So we must be mindful, if we don't do it, this is what might happen to young people.
Absolutely.
So it's a very interesting report, and as I said, I thought the presentation, the slides encapsulated it really well, so thank you very much. Is there any more questions on that, or else shall we've accepted the report, we're not allowed, we cannot make any further recommendations except to accept it, note it, and know that we use the knowledge in it to apply to our policy and planning. Really, that's what we have to do.
Councillor Brabazon, Jackie has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jackie, I didn't see it.
No, that's fine. It was just to respond to the point around HLP. I mean, it absolutely, without a doubt, the themes in the report would reflect what some of the trends that we're seeing at Haringey Learning Partnership. And actually, part of the AP task force and the funding that's been allocated to that area of work is including a key focus on young people at risk of exclusion and offending behaviour. So we're using some of that money to second, I can't remember if it's second, Emma, please correct me if I'm wrong, but either second or utilise resource from the Youth Justice Service to support those young people in HLP. So it's very much connected. And just to agree with your comment, there are no surprises in this report. I think what we should take is that there were absolutely some positives about Haringey doing some particular pieces of work that are really trying to address disproportionality. So the challenge still remains really for us to crack on.
Yeah, that's it. But looking at the age group we've got now, but the age group coming through, and that's the other challenge, which we can't ignore. So I'm going to move us on, and we're now going to go to page 95, which is the Voice of the Child Guidance, which is another really interesting report. And I think this comes from you, Sarah.
It certainly does. I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a very short presentation to share with you. This is the right one. Can you see that?
Yes, everybody can see it.
Lovely. Okay, so I understand you've got a copy of the guidance itself, so I just wanted to take you through a short summary of the practitioner guidance, which we launched at the end of last year. So what the guidance highlights is the legislation that underpins listening to children, so the Children Act 1989, which highlights that the children's voices should be paramount, and the United Nations Conventions of the Rights of the Child for their voices to be heard, and also the Ofsted framework ensures they take into account that the voice of the child is also considered during their inspection. It also highlights the importance of our language, so using the language that cares, not using kind of jargonistic language that our young people don't understand. And then it talks about different examples of how we can hear our young people's voices and involve them in decisions that are made about them. So kind of it might be that it's a younger baby or a child who is non-verbal, and ensuring that the social workers are hearing their voices through observations, talking to other professionals that are involved with them, that children and young people are involved in meetings about them, so they're invited to them if they want to go to them, that they can take part in them, they can chair the meetings. It also highlights lots of different direct working tools for our practitioners, and so it has links to lots of different examples of how they can work with the young people using different processes. So it might be the 3 houses, which is one of the tools that we use, or it might be just different kind of worksheets and things like that. Also, how to involve young people through court processes. It's really important that they get their voice heard through the court process as well. As I've already referred to, different links to those resources. I just put on this slide because I think that they set the scene really, didn't they, our young people, in terms of why we should be listening to them. So I have just put that on a slide for you. You'll get a copy of these slides. Just wanted to highlight some of the work that we're doing with Aspire. So the young people, as I'm sure you're already aware, are involved in the recruitment of senior managers within Haringey. So they have, we set up a panel and the young people ask the senior managers questions. And then they give a view about whether they think that we should recruit them senior managers or not. So quite a powerful process. The young people have always also been involved in the training with our newly qualified social workers. So they completed an exercise with them about what a good social worker is. So that was a really good experience for our newly qualified social workers. They said that they gained a lot from that. So that's something that we'll continue to do through the new cohorts of our newly qualified social workers that come through to Haringey. We also undertake with Aspire consultations, so that could be internally or externally. We've had our health colleagues asked to come along to Aspire when they're kind of developing some of their policies, or they just want to get young people's views on some of the services that they've used. And also we internally within Haringey Children's Services will also consult with our young people when we're developing policies and things like that. So the young people have been consulted on this particular Voice of the Child guidance itself. We've also started a pilot. So we're really trying to look at how different ways to get our young people's views. And one of the things that we've just started at the moment is a bi-monthly survey to our younger cohort of young people. So the under 15s and the over 15s, and just setting out a survey which is very short. It's only 4 questions, but we know that they're kind of key themes that come up for our young people. The first survey we're just looking at the moment, and any of the key themes that come out of that survey, Aspire will work through them, and then they'll report back to the senior leadership team to look at what can we do about this. You know, these are the key things that are coming up. We need to put an action plan in place together alongside the senior leadership team. So I'm quite pleased that that's something that we're piloting. We've also implemented what's called the child-centred review process, which is for the children looked after reviews. So it's a new guidance which sets out how you can involve your children and young people in their looked after children review, and that they should be the centre of that. And through that process, young people have chaired their own reviews. They have presented PowerPoints, and we're really looking at how we can be really creative, ensure that they're very much the centre of the review, and that they can set the scene really and be involved as little or as much as they want to. I observed a young person chairing their review, and I'm sure the young people that you saw today that would be absolutely fantastic at chairing their own review. We are also, where's that gone? Sorry. We're also working, Aspire also working alongside the fostering panel, because what the fostering panel want is to have a crib sheet from our young people to tell them what a good foster parent looks like. So that's something that we're currently working on with them. In terms of next steps, so we are in the process of recruiting a practitioner who will be setting up a shadow children's board for our Haringey Safeguarding Children's Partnership. So what that will mean is that we will recruit some young people, and each partnership will have a young person who works alongside them and who can support them in developing any processes within their partnership, and also be that child's voice for that partnership as well. We are in the process of recruiting an apprentice who will be a children's engagement and participation worker. And this apprentice will be ring-fenced for a care experienced young person. So I'm really quite excited about that. So their role will be to go out to young people and really get a sense of what young people have got to say and feed that back again to meetings like this today. We are also looking at expanding the recruitment of staff and involving Aspire, not only the senior leadership recruitment of staff, but also social workers. And Aspire and the Haringey Children's Academy are looking at producing a multi-agency training package for practitioners, so that the young people can support the facilitation of training to tell practitioners how it feels to be a care experienced child or young person. And Young Aspire are also planning to work with foster carers to implement the HALO code within foster homes. I have put the link there, but the HALO code is actually on the next screen, so we'll have a look at that, and that the next slide will explain what that is. And we're also working alongside the Children with Disability Service, because we're going to start, we're going to form a children care group for our children with learning disabilities within the Children with Disability Service. So I'll just go on to the HALO hair code. So this is the work that, so the Learning Partnership have this across Haringey already, but we want to ensure that this is implemented into our foster homes as well. So you probably can't see it on screen, so I'll read it out. So our workplace champions the right of staff to embrace all Afro hairstyles. We acknowledge that Afro textured hair is an important part of our Black employees' racial, ethnic, cultural and religious identities, and requires a specific styling for hair and maintenance. We celebrate Afro textured hair worn in all styles, including but not limited to afros, locks, twists, braids, cornrows, fades, hair straightened through the application of heat or chemical weaves, wigs, headscarves and wraps. And it says, in this workplace, we recognise and celebrate our colleagues' identities. We're a community, but that a community built on ethos of equality and respect, where hair texture and style have no bearing on an employee's ability to succeed. So across the schools learning partnership, this is something that is well embedded within Haringey, and we just want to ensure that that again, as I've said, is embedded within our foster homes as well for our young people. And that is the end of the presentation. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Thank you. Anybody want to have any questions here? Tammy, your hand's up.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say that is living your values in practice, isn't it? That's so great. What a great kind of achievement. It just really shows how much you're listening to the feedback of young people, how kind of central their voices are. And I think to hear that you're ring fencing an apprenticeship for somebody who has got care, that's music to my ears. Actually, it's such an amazing kind of thing to see. And I really hope that you can role model that to other places. Those are the kind of, when we talk about kind of levelling up and the fact that there's still so much discrimination out there in the workplace, for people that kind of have that experience, to kind of see somebody addressing that and giving them the opportunity to use their experience in a really positive way. That's amazing. So really well done, I think, to everyone that's been involved. I really look forward to kind of seeing it in practice.
Thank you.
Anybody got any questions or comments?
I've got a quick question. It's a bit technical. Sorry, it was just from when I was reading the papers. I hope that's okay. I agree with everything that Tammy just said, and it feels like there's a lot of really very positive steps forward in terms of embedding the voice of the child, and not just in the relationship with the social worker, but in the wider system. So I'm sure we all really, really welcome that, and thank you for it, Sarah, and everyone involved. My technical question was in the guidance that was provided in the pack on page 109, and you might not want to answer it now, but I wanted to know, so on page 109 of the pack, which is page 13, it talks about when doing the assessment, the child's parents and carers and professionals' views should be regarded as of equal importance to each other. And I wanted to know how that fits in with the paramountcy principle, which is the guiding principle in the statute, because those two things felt inconsistent to me. And so I'd just like to understand sort of what that means.
Yeah, so it's just in terms of, so if you consider our children with disabilities, for example, their carer may have lots of knowledge about that young person. So if they have difficulties in communicating, that we ensure that we're taking their considerations into account. And it might be an example might be a parent who also has a learning disability, and that's why they're unable to parent their child, but it doesn't mean that they don't know what their child wants and needs. So that's really what that means.
Okay.
I have, sorry, Anne, did you want to come in?
Yes, I absolutely take on Councillor Weston's comments, because there's a lot behind it, Councillor Weston. And so I think we should look to clarify that, because I think what's intended is that we are respectful to everybody who speaks and that we take that at face value. But if we were challenged, then Councillor Weston, I think, is right, that we're not treating all views with the equal weight because of the paramountcy. But absolutely what you said. So if we can just tweak the words so that we're sure that it's not open to misinterpretation down the line. I think that's what you're meaning, Councillor Weston, is that right?
Yeah, it's just like I completely understand that different children, young people will be able in different ways to express their views and so on. And I totally take on board what Sarah just said, and that makes complete sense, but that's not what the document says. And so, I just, so thanks,
you very
Anne,
much for that.
Probably be helpful.
Thank you very much for
that. Can I come in here? I think this is a really, really important report. And I think this piece of guidance is really, really important. And I think it's incredibly timely because of those dreadful cases over the summer. Was it over the summer? Well, I can't remember when it was, a few months ago, Arthur and Star, those two children. And particularly because, as I know, Anne and I had a conversation, it sends a sort of shiver down your spine that you actually did hear the voice of the child. And I suppose, I think, I don't know if it's a question or a comment really, but I think this is incredibly important guidance for staff, because we know how the voice of the child can be worked round by people who are quite manipulative or have got other agendas or whatever. So it's really about how we emphasise that to particularly our new staff or inexperienced staff going into difficult situations, having to face difficult situations. And as you know, we know the legislation says the Children Act, the voice, the welfare of the child is paramount, the child's voice, and so on. But in real life, sometimes that can be drowned out. So I don't know how you word that in the document. It's sort of there, because you talk about body language and things like that. But I suppose I'm asking whether, when you're doing the training and so on and talking to staff about this guidance, that is confronted. Because that case was just shocked. It really did shock the whole nation, didn't it? You know, so it's not really, it's about how you use the guidance. As I said, I think it's incredibly timely, and I think it's a really good piece of work. So it's really just some thought, trying to be thoughtful about how you apply it. I don't know if anybody wants to come back.
I guess just in terms of some reassurance for you, Beverly Hendricks and myself are setting up some regular light bite sessions for all the workforce, so that this isn't lost. We've had our launch, but we're also conscious that we need to ensure that this is fully embedded and that our social workers know how to use the guidance. So I just wanted to share that with you as well.
Pauline.
Might also be a good opportunity to share with you. One of the other things that we're actively involved in as well is Kitbag, a pilot, where we've been giving out toolkits, if you like, to practitioners to use to increase the creative way that we're communicating with children and supporting practitioners to try innovation. And so we're doing that in conjunction with some other professional bodies. And one of the other creative ways as well throughout the pandemic, when we do virtual calls to children, we sometimes get them to take us on a little tour around the house. So we get to see more than just little Johnny in a little room that's nice and tidy. So it's innovation really, and it continues to evolve. So yeah, lots of different things. And we've also done some training with a lot of staff in our disabled children's team. I think Bev joined them as well, Macathon, so that we extend the level of communication ability of staff. So it's not just the usual direct work tools, we have to tailor that to the needs of the children so that we optimise. And we also use advocates as well, sometimes an intermediary depending on the circumstances. So there's heaps going on, too much to mention.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to say anything else, or shall we move on?
Actually, that was one thing I made a note of, but thanks, Pauline, about the advocacy service. It doesn't have to be now, but I would be really interested at some point to understand how that's used by our children and young people, and whether it's, you know, kind of, is that a matter of routine? Is it only available in certain circumstances and so on? Because I think where there are difficulties in communication, which could be for any number of reasons. And I think what's really helpful in that guidance note is about asking social workers to reflect on their own reasons why they might not always want to hear the voice of the child, might not always hear the voice of the child as accurately as somebody else might. So I think that advocacy service is a really interesting part of this. So at some point it would be nice to hear a bit more on that, but not tonight, because I'm aware of Anne keeping an eye on the time, which is entirely reasonable.
Although Bev has got something to add, so we'll want to hear that.
I really liked your question, Councillor Weston, and the paramountcy principle, and I'd quite like to get into a written dialogue with you around wishes and feelings, the welfare principle, and where we think that fits in this guidance. So if you'll entertain me, I'd like to write to you on that.
I don't know if I'll be able to answer. It's a long time since I did child law, but you never know. My mind's a bit freer these days than it usually is, so, you know, I might have scope to do it, but of course
it will be an opportunity for us to have that exchange.
Well, which raises that well, it's interesting you said that, because I was thinking about the guardians in court and the voice of the child. So whether you want to include other people, but I think that's the other way in which the voice of the child is heard in the court, and indeed sometimes children writing to the judge or going to court themselves. Older children, or even, you know, 8-9-year-olds they will meet the magistrates or the judge outside of the court. There are different ways, aren't there, Bev, that have been used.
Yes, there are, and we see the voice of the child approach and the guidance that's been issued. This is forever developing. Since its publication and its launch, there's already some new work that we've taken on. So the more we speak to children, the more this expands. But it's got to be central to the way we work. That's got to be the heart and the emphasis of how we engage.
It does make me think that perhaps there should be an addendum which could come from the young people or through the Aspire Care Council about what they think the voice of the child is and how it should be heard. You know, we've sort of had a small insight from Yusuf and Ali, but actually maybe they should have their own section in the guidance. The thought? I leave that with you, Bev.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
No, I mean, I don't leave it with you to think about. And but why not? Yeah. Anyway, I think this was really, really interesting report and a very interesting piece of work. And maybe we'll come back to it to hear more on how it's progressing, because it's at the heart. It is at the heart of this committee, is to have the voice of the child. So I think perhaps we might return to this in the next. I think is this our last meeting before the pre-election? I think it probably is.
Yeah. We're not sure. I'll have I'm not sure. It might be. I think
but we can return to it in the new municipal year.
Definitely.
And if we do get our workshop in about corporate parenting and social care before the thing, we can talk about it then. For the member, you know, I was thinking that we should have a member workshop, because we've had lots of inspections from Ofsted, or visits, I should say. So it's to sort of galvanise us a bit more in this area, and our colleagues, and I mean from both sides. I don't just mean the Labour group, I mean both sides. So let's leave it there. Now we move to our final report, which is the sorry, Anne.
Just before we do that, you know, as Bev says, that we're going to build and build and build on this, and I just wanted to, if it's not been, you know, just to say that, and we'll build on it for all our children and young people across all services, including in Jackie's services. And so we've made efforts to do that, but actually we just need to do that. You know, we want to continue to do that too. So it's a really rich report. Thank you. Just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
And of course it does build on the fact of building confidence and people as young people as citizens, which is a broad view, you know, that people have a voice and they're not done to, which is excellent. Okay, so we're now on to item 9, which is the last item on the agenda, which is the annual report, the fostering service, and that's on page 117. And I think that will be Pauline, is it? Sorry, I've got to go.
No, that's me, Councillor Brabazon.
Oh, sorry, Faz. I'm not the
That's
page,
all right.
you see. I am now. Right.
That's okay.
Annual report fostering service.
Thank you. I've got a few slides, so I'll share it. Let me just put it up on the screen. I don't know if everyone can see it.
Yep, can see it, Fires.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was just worried that my VPN might expire and throw me out, but it hasn't happened. So thank you. So it's an annual report for fostering service for April 2020 to March 2021. So I've got a bit of data to share. Hopefully it wouldn't be too boring. But before I do that, just to introduce the service structure for everyone. So the fostering service consists of 3 teams. One of the team is called the Recruitment and Assessment team, where we do undertake all the assessments of the foster carers and also the assessment for the special guardianship carers. And we have 2 teams designated for fostering support. They carry out, they support the foster carers through their supervising social workers. The service manager for the fostering service is Sandy Bansal, and she's here with me today. And Sandy and I, you know, we've contributed in this report, basically. So a few data. No, I'm not really as good as Richard in terms of going through data, but I'll give it a go. But I thought that this data would help to, you know, illustrate, you know, the work that's been undertaken and how we are moving forward. So what we've tried to do is not just look at last year's data, but also the data for the last 3 years for a comparison to see where we are basically. So the table here, it shows the number of looked after children in Haringey in comparison to our statistical neighbours, and you can see the last year the total number of looked after children were 391, which is we put Haringey sort of in the middle in terms of our neighbours, and on average the average is 411. There is some reduction if you look at 2019. There's some reduction in the number of children. However, in terms of the complexity of the children that's coming into care, that hasn't decreased. That the complexity has definitely increased, which we'll see in the next few slides. So one of the key things to look at is the age of the looked after children. More and more the older children are coming into care, and in fact the number of children age 12 and above are continuing to grow. In 2021 they made above 64% of the looked after children in Haringey, and many of these children have complex emotional and mental health needs, suffered trauma, and some of them are vulnerable to exploitation and extrafamilial harm. And that also meant that identifying suitable placement for them was a challenge for the service. We looked at the gender of the children who are coming into care, and obviously traditionally it's the male children, the boys who are who they occupy a major proportion of the looked after children, but there are more female or girl looked after children are also coming into care. And in 2019, the ratio was 59% male to 41% female. Ethnicity, the children from Black and minority ethnic communities are obviously clearly overrepresented in the looked after children population. If you look at the data, 54%. So that's clearly, a major factor in terms of, our service response. We also now look at the ethnicity of the foster carers. So 59% of our carers are either from Black African or Black Caribbean heritage. So, I mean, one can argue that actually we've got a high proportion of children from, Black and minority ethnic communities and carers from similar backgrounds. So that's probably, solves a lot of problems, but it actually doesn't, because there's still a huge gap in terms of carers. There's we need more carers basically from Black and minority ethnic communities. A placement type. So I just want to illustrate. This is data in terms of the children who are in a foster placement. So when we take into consideration the children who are in a foster placement, in 2021, we had 56% children were placed with in-house foster carers, as opposed to 44% with agency carers. And if you look at the data, for the past 3 years, there's we are, despite a lot of challenges, we're succeeding in keeping children with in-house foster carers and increasing the number of in-house foster carers. And at the same time, we're trying to decrease our reliance on agency carers. I thought I will mention the age factor. So we have a good proportion of our foster carers aged between 60 to 65. Now, many of these carers are perfectly fit and healthy, and they continue to provide excellent care for our children. But obviously, some of them may think of retiring or may want to take a break. So obviously, in terms of our service, we are making sure that there is not a gap in terms of the service provision, in terms of our recruitment. The geographical consideration. So we do have a higher volume of foster carers that live out of borough. So if you look at the table here, 60 carers live out of borough and 45 within Haringey. However, majority of them live actually in the neighbouring boroughs, and only 11 carers live outside of London, for example, maybe in Kent or Luton and areas like that. So the key priorities and the objectives from the previous year. So our focus, we had a strong focus on recruitment and retention of foster carers. And it was obviously a challenge because of COVID. Our normal recruitment activities in terms of going out, visiting the candidates, the applicants, undertaking assessments, and those activities were very much limited due to the number of lockdowns and the restrictions that were put in place. And other activities, undertaking various checks, for example, was also a challenge. One of the key things is that medical reports from the GPs, when GPs are under a lot of pressure, and sometimes this is not one of their priorities to provide the report, that continues to be a challenge. So despite all those challenges, we managed to recruit a number of foster carers. We wanted to be innovative and look at other ways of increasing the capacity, for example, increasing capacity of existing carers. For example, if one carer is is able to care for one child, and that's they're allowed to do, we looked at the possibility of them increasing the capacity. There may be changes in their circumstances. They may have a bigger house now, or the children have left home, so they have more capacity. So we've looked at those, trying to be creative about it. Reducing delays in assessment and the recruitment process, that was our focus. And obviously some of the delays are COVID and lockdown related, but if you look at the report, the assessment, some of the assessment did take a long time. Average was 422 days, which is obviously we are quite keen to reduce, and it has been reduced since then to Sandy would correct me, I think 4 to 5 months now, and we are working to further even reducing it. In terms of the practice in the fostering service, we worked hard in terms of embedding of the signs of safety model, how we work, how we deliver our practice, how we work with our foster carers, in terms of the supervision of the social workers. We used the signs of safety model. There was a focus on training. The key training that we focused on, the secure-based training, signs of safety, attachment, and obviously due to the COVID and lockdown, a lot of activities couldn't take place in person. So we've shifted to online learning options, and we've helped foster carers to access online learning platforms. Voice of the child, obviously, Sarah did a presentation earlier, and then we heard from the children from Aspire, which was amazing. So we used Aspire and an organization called LEAP, and focused on child participation in fostering panel, for example. One of the focus was on the placement stability. It's still a key focus. we wanted to make sure that placements that are shaky or at risk of breaking down, we take prompt measures to prevent placement breakdowns through placement stability meetings or unstable placement panels and so on. Some support were provided through COVID support. For example, laptops were provided for or looked after children. Therapeutic support, we had access to therapists who supported the service and the carers. We also worked very, very closely with the Haringey Foster Carers Association in terms of the support mechanism. We also have introduced the Mockingbird project, which is a project we have in Haringey where existing foster carers are supported by a cluster of carers with one key carer. They provide respite, support, guidance, mentoring, and this is going really, really well. So these were the focus for the previous year, and in terms of our how far we have gone. Moving on to the key areas for development in the year ahead, which is 2022-23. Now, our focus firmly remains on the recruitment and retention. We want to double our effort to recruit more foster carers. And not only just, we just don't want the numbers, we also want to ensure that the foster carers are able to meet the needs of an evolving demographic of looked after children in Haringey. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have an older cohort of children. Some of them have a long history of trauma and earlier experiences, and then came to the attention of children's services. Some of them are vulnerable to exploitation, and also the changing demographic in terms of the background of the children. We have obviously children from Black and African Caribbean communities, but we also have a very sizable Turkish community, people from other parts of the world, Eastern Europe, and so on. We wanted to make sure that the support that the foster carers are able to meet the needs of this diverse looked after population. We focused on publicity. This is our focus in terms of that's through online social media platforms, local media outlets. We're exploring the possibility of having a stall at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in terms of recruiting foster carers. We want to generate, and actually this is also paying off, and I'm sure Sandy would agree with me. We're actually receiving more inquiries, more interest in terms of foster carers recruitment. And also one of the key areas, obviously, we want the foster carers to be remunerated properly for their hard work. So we are reviewing their foster carers allowances. So we are in line with our neighboring local authorities. And equality and diversity. I think one of the key area is that we want to make sure that the children are looked after in a culturally matched placement where they feel comfortable, they feel they belong, and they get the support, and that is our key focus. And then we also want to make sure that in terms of permanency planning and the placement stability for the children are matched with their foster carers at the earliest opportunity. So that's a key focus, and that's through our permanency planning, which is a key objective. We now have a permanency planning tracker. So through that tracker, we regularly check all the children, looked after children in Haringey, that are waiting to be matched with their foster carer. So any child who's been in a foster placement for some time, we make sure that they are, they're matched with their foster placement, so they have the security and safety in their mind, that they know that this is their forever family, this is where they're going to grow up. But obviously, in order to do that, careful planning is needed, and we also need to make sure that this is the right placement for the children. And training and support for not only for the staff but also for the foster carers. So we are ensuring that they're accessing their regular training, the mandatory training, and I think I mentioned training in the earlier slide in terms of the secure-based training, in terms of signs of safety and attachment. That continues to be our focus. We are also and some of the training we are doing in conjunction with our partner in practice, Islington, and also with the Adoption London North. Some of the key area include the life story work, for example, which is quite key for children. Feedback is also being used. We are trying to generate interest in foster carers, encouraging them to complete their feedback in terms of their service, so we can improve basically. So these are the prior. It's a snapshot of what we are doing. Obviously, the report has more details, but I thought it would be good to just highlight. I think that's the last slide. Yeah. So just going to...
Thank you very much, Fayaz. Just to say, my VPN might cut out, in which case, if it does, in the middle of everything, I was asked Ellen if you just hold the chair while it comes back. I was just doing that. Thank you. That was a very, very interesting report, and for good summary from the printed document with the slides. Questions, Tammy?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a really, really comprehensive report. Thanks. I just want to pick up actually on ethnicity and the recording of ethnicity data. And it actually sounds like, from hearing you, that you have a much more comprehensive kind of breakdown. But the reason that it's really important, so I work in health data science in my day job, and this is probably a really technical point, but one of the kind of big things that we're looking at is kind of nationally tackling health inequality. And we're doing a huge piece of work at the moment on ethnicity coding, and kind of standardizing but better understanding. And there's something, we know that adults who have experienced care are actually more prone to certain types of health conditions, as are lots of other parts of the population. And there's that intersectionality thing, isn't there, of overlaying kind of those different experiences and your kind of ethnicity, and also kind of thinking about, so the other thing that we're looking at as well is culture and how that differs to ethnicity. And actually we don't capture culture enough, and yet we also know that there are cultural kind of groups that suffer from certain types of health conditions more than others. So there's a really important kind of piece of work, and I think, again, there's a real lack of awareness. So I've raised it quite a few times in my organisation, and that actually I never hear anyone, when we're talking about groups that experience health inequality, talking about those with care experience, particularly as adults. So it's not something that is kind of being thought about in terms of social and life experience, and it really needs to be. So I just wondered, because obviously the breakdown that we've got here is actually quite kind of light touch. It sounds like you are collecting and have much more in-depth data, but it's just something to consider actually, and why it's, we're trying to impress upon sort of all kind of organisations that would collect this kind of data, why it's so important, and actually the massive difference that it could make to future kind of adult populations in terms of better understanding. If I reflect back on the report that we heard earlier about the experience of young Black and Afro-Caribbean boys and some of the health conditions that we know exist, we might then kind of look at, sort of mental health and undiagnosed SEN, a care experience, and what that looks like as a health inequality as an adult. So it starts to tell a much bigger picture about the whole life experience of somebody. So sorry, that's probably really technical and boring, but it's such a growing kind of field, and the more we learn and use data kind of really intelligently, and the more we collect the right data and also seek permission. So one of the other things that we're doing is really trying to understand from patients and the public how they like to be described, you know, because lots of people don't recognize, you know, because again, there is no real stand, you know, we use the ONS kind of standard kind of descriptors, but lots of people then don't fit themselves into certain brackets. You know, if you're white Eastern European, you know, sometimes there isn't a bracket for that works for you. So I wonder how much kind of consultation and what kind of what's the, you know, what kind of standardization are we using?
So I think the technical answer, Councillor, in terms of recording people's ethnicity, that's, we've got codes for that when we record it in Mosaic, and then I think, and it's quite detailed in terms of you know, how we record. Sorry, Anne, I don't know, you want to do? Oh, okay.
Anne?
Yeah. So that's the technical part of it, really. So we don't just say if someone is black, we just don't say black, you know, whether it's black African, black Caribbean, you know, black other. So it goes into quite details. But the other point Councillor made in terms of collecting data in terms of people's health, absolutely, it's important. Some of the data is probably you know, collected, but I think what we also need to bear in mind is that if you look at, for example, mental health, for example, we know from studies from researchers that, you know, the people from black and, you know, minority communities are overly represented in terms of the mental health diagnosis. Even if we look at the recent COVID deaths, and it's people from ethnic minorities and the black communities are, you know, the death is disproportionately higher, basically. So I think absolutely right. We need to look at those and analyze and actually, you know, and use it in terms of our service delivery. I don't know if that answered part of your question.
Anne, you've got your hand up.
Very much, Fires. Thank you very much for your presentation. And Councillor Palmer, thank you very much for your question. That my thoughts on it are, would it be helpful for us to ask public health to see what data they have? I suspect they don't have a lot, because actually I don't myself think I've seen very few what do you call them, ethnicity recording things that ask for care. Are you care experienced? Very, very few. So I suspect there's very little data. And in relation to your question about health outcomes, it reminds me of the work that Scrutiny are doing on poverty. And I wonder whether this is a question that we should add to the work that's being done on that Scrutiny on poverty. And I know certainly that for Haringey, poverty is such an endemic feature. And we know too that mental health is one of the highest health indicators. So I'm not sure that there'd be a difference if you're looked after than if you're not looked after, because some young people go straight back home and some people are impoverished and they don't come near the system.
And that's where that intersectionality comes in, isn't it? Kind of in other parts of the country, you know, if you are, you know, a person that's experienced care and you're white, you know, your health outcomes might be very different to a young black person in Tottenham who's had care experience, but also has a multitude of other things going on. So it's a brand new and kind of growing fund. And I'm not surprised to hear it's not. It'd be really interesting to see, you know, because there is no standardization at the moment in terms of NHS or anyone else. And if we actually want to address health inequalities and really understand kind of what is going on and where we actually need to base centre, you know, where we have medical centres, for goodness sake, you know, where we actually put our resources to tackle those things, we actually don't really understand it properly. So it was just something to kind of throw in to,
absolutely,
you know,
I agree.
you've got some really rich data there, haven't you, that potentially could make such a difference and influence kind of other, you know, kind of health bodies as well, to think about where they allocate resource more effectively.
And I agree with you 100%. And we know that the mental health of young people begins to emerge, you know, sort of, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, younger and younger years. But we absolutely know that mental health in Haringey is the right word, chronic. endemic, whatever the right word. There's a lot of it, and so there is something there about, is there something that mental health could help us do through the future JSNA to begin to gather data? Thank you. I hope that wasn't too complicated a response.
I've got Sakina and Ellen, and Anne. I'm noticing the time. We're going to give you a hard time about that, Anne.
I'm never going to mention time again.
I'm hoping we can finish at 9. Is that okay with everybody? Do you want to go until 10? Right. I knew that was a good line. Right. So, Sakina, you want to go first? Is that okay with you, Ellen?
Thanks, Zena. So quick comment really, I suppose, just going back to the cost of living point that we were discussing earlier, and just to sort of note that, you know, when you're thinking about remuneration of foster carers, that the cost of living, you know, is crisis that we're living through at the moment is sort of factored in, you know, how much more expensive food is and energy and all those other things. That was it.
Thanks, Councillor. I mean, obviously, you know, foster carers do a very, very good job for us, and then I think we pay a little bit less than the other neighbouring boroughs. We're now trying to bring it on par, basically. Bev and I and Sandy are working, and we recognise it. This has been raised on many, you know, Haringey Foster Carers Association meetings. We have had a discussion. We've got the data, so we will try. And I have to say that not all foster carers, money is obviously, but I think many of them, they do it, you know, for the satisfaction. They want to do something. They want to give something back, basically. But we, you know, but we do, you know, we do try and, you know, make sure that they are properly remunerated. Yeah.
Ellen?
Thank you. I've got one question on the ethnicity of foster carers, and it might be that you have this data in the more detailed information that you capture through Mosaic, but do we have a record of, or do we keep records about foster carers who are from a Kurdish or Turkish background? Because I'm really mindful of the community in Haringey. We've got a very, very large Kurdish and Turkish community, or communities rather, and we also know that there is significant, often gang activity, unfortunately, among those communities. So some of those same risks that we see for boys of Black heritage or mixed heritage apply to people from those communities as well. So I just wondered whether there was any scope in future for us to be more explicit around both the ethnicity of our young people in care, actually, and whether they're from a Kurdish or Turkish background, as well as foster carers, because I think that's of particular relevance to Haringey. So maybe that's a comment rather than a question. And my question was, are there any plans to expand the Mockingbird project? Because it seems from the report that it's really helped with placement stability, and I know that was the aim of the project. Yes. So are there plans to expand that in future? Thanks.
I can speak about the Mockingbird project. So, yeah, I mean, it's going really, really well. I think we wanted to give it sort of 12 months from the launch of the first constellation, and we're actually coming up to sort of month 10 of that. Yeah, the constellation, it's going well. So in future, within the next sort of period of 12 months following on for that, we will be looking to expand the Mockingbird project. We would be looking at recruiting more of our in-house foster carers to become Mockingbird carers. The current setup is that we've got one hub carer, and then we've got 8 constellation carers. So they're there to support each other. They have social events. They have weekly sort of coffee mornings, and they're there to provide respite care to each other as well. So yeah, probably from about March onwards, if it continues to go as well as it is, then we will be looking at expanding that out and getting other carers recruited onto a second constellation.
That's really great, thank you. It's good to hear that, because I remember, you know, a big issue is caring for the foster carers as well. So if that's a way of providing that support, then that's good that it's working, and I'm really glad it's going to be expanded. So thank you for that.
And it impacts greatly on placement stability as well. We haven't had any placement breakdowns or any disruptions within our Mockingbird constellation. So it's really good.
Sorry, I was waiting. I think you're going to. Did you want to comment about the Kurdish and Turkish comments, Fires?
In terms of when we undertake the assessments of foster carers, which is a extremely detailed assessment, so every single information in terms of their ethnicity, background, when did they, if they're from abroad, when they came, how they settled, everything is there. So in terms of the data, if they're from Kurdish or Turkish background or any other background, that's clearly, we have that data basically. And Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, because we do have that in our on our system.
We do. We have a breakdown. So what we've got in the report is just the key areas, but when you go into the actual mosaic, there's subcategories within that, and we are obviously very mindful of that within our recruitment process as well. And you know, part of our recruitment strategies has been to sort of extend out to visit faith groups and raise the profile of fostering within Haringey to attract more foster carers from other ethnic minorities. And so far, you know, we've been quite successful in raising Haringey's profile through the social media platforms that Fires mentioned earlier. And our sort of inquiries rates of, you know, people within the community inquiring to become foster carers has risen quite significantly over the last sort of 6 to 8 months, which has obviously impacted on our assessments that we're doing of our foster carers as well, which has increased quite considerably too.
I think this has been an evening of very positive reports all round. I just wanted to ask you one quick question. I've got 1 minute, so I'll be really, really quick. It's to do with your data shows that there are more children in the older age range being fostered than younger children. And my first question is that because kids are going through the system and they've just been there a long time and they're older, or they're coming in as older children? If they're coming in as older children, what is the level of placement stability and breakdown, given I'm guessing now the complexity and children's life history and the difficulties that they had in the past and how foster carers deal with that? So I know we're out of time, so if you want to send me a written answer, that's fine. Otherwise, a very quick
I'll try
headlines.
Yeah, I'll try and do headlines, because actually that question deserves quite a detailed answer actually. So from the data, it actually shows that a lot of older children are coming into care, and that's established basically. I mean, obviously there are children who are growing older, being in the same placement. That's also true, but there are also a lot of older children coming into care. So in terms of Councillor, was your question about how we are addressing this challenge?
Well, it's really about the fact that when kids are older, I imagine stability may be a bit more difficult. That was behind my question, really.
Yes, thank you. So I think I mentioned our placement stability meetings, which takes place when a placement, especially children who, when they're a bit older, whether it's a case of a child who was in the foster placement from a very young age, but now a bit older and displaying behavioral issues, or a child who's just come into care because of behavioral issues, it's always, it's a challenge. So we use the placement stability meetings. We have an excellent panel called Unstable Placement Panel, which is a multi-agency panel where we look at the complex issues forensically in terms of, and try to support the child and the placement through a multi-agency platform. So the range of activities that take place basically, and this is a key focus in not just in children in care, but I think other parts of the services as well.
Thank you. Bev, I'll give you the last word, Bev.
Thanks so much, Councillor Brabazon. Thank you, Fires and Sandy. I think our data tells us that our stability is intact. But there is a challenge for us. If the current trend of adolescents and parenting collapsing around 13, 14 continues, we know that that can be very difficult to get the stability, our standard of stability sustained with that age range. So it's one that we continue to watch. And when we're doing the recruiting and the training of new foster carers coming in, we're not looking for foster carers who are more mature and experienced, have a settled lifestyle. We're looking for some foster carers who are much more representative of the demographic and the need in the service, who are flexible, who can join the Mockingbird scheme, who can be trauma informed and trained. So we've got to be responsive in our recruitment strategies. You'll laugh, Councillor Brabazon, when the service approached me and said, we're going to put a banner up at Tottenham Football Club. I said, no. And then they persuaded me that this is the right thing to do, Beverly. That's the audience that we need. So that's how innovative, if you like, and creative the service has been around how we recruit to need.
Excellent. And I think this is a discussion which we should return to, which is the shape of the cohorts of children coming into the care service is a very, very important topic for this committee, because it does, as you say, impact on the carers, foster carers, but also what the challenges are when you're taking a teenager into care as opposed to a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. I mean, I think, the pattern's changing, I imagine. I would like us to return to that as it informs your policy planning. And maybe I'm not asking you to answer the question now, but in the report you reference special guardianship and whether that's a route for taking in the teenagers or not, who knows. But the challenges must be enormous, and I do think we might want to hear a bit more about that. And you got the last word.
Only to agree with you, Councillor Brabazon, that there's a piece of work to do there, and we can put it on a future agenda here and also bring it through one of your one-to-ones. While Fayaz has been doing his presentation, I've been reflecting on the change in how we work with our teenagers. There was a time, say 15, 20 years ago, when we didn't take them into care generally, and some people just didn't bring 16-year-olds into care at all. And so the number that you had, so the bar chart that due to age was skewed. It was a bell curve that meant the younger ones were in and the middle ones were in and the old ones were not. And then we had the Southwark judgment in about 2007, and so we began to bring older teenagers in, but put them in really cheap, unregulated housing at low cost. And now we've changed where we're treating them more equitably, and so but we also need to look at the services that we commission to be sure that we work and support them well. Bev's done a lot of work on age of care and that older age range, and Jackie also addresses them through her services too. So as we go forward in terms of our strategy for the next 3, 4, 5 years, I'm sure that's where we're going to be heavily focused.
It's a very interesting area, at which point at 9:05 nobody wants to talk any more about it, because we've had a very, very, very interesting meeting, and I want to thank all the officers. The presentations have been uniformly excellent, and the committee members have been uniformly excellent. Good questioning, and I think if Martin Riddell were with us, he'd give us a good report, Anne.
He would. Councillor Brabazon, Bev's got her hand up, and so I think last word to Bev, certainly from the officers.
I really couldn't finish this meeting without inviting you. You see that the head of service for corporate parenting has in his background, would you like to foster for Haringey? I really can't finish the meeting without extending an invitation to you all in your networks to come and consider fostering for Haringey.
I'm doing the next best thing, Bev. I'm joining your panels. So thank you all very much indeed. It's been a long meeting. Thank you everybody for so much hard work. And
Thank you very much, everyone.
Very difficult area of work. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.